Good evening, everypony. Today we've got another exciting story, so let's begin this episode of FIM Fiction Roulette, a series where I go through the annals of FIM fiction, take a random story and a random chapter from within said story, if applicable, and read it aloud for all of you to hear. The introduction to today's story frames it as a squad of specialists investigating a series of murders. I'm quite excited. I think the magic and many different creatures in the world of Equestria would lend itself well to murder mysteries. I'm not sure if this story is going to be more detective style or something more like a military mission, but either way, it'll be a treat. As always, we'll start with the introduction and then head into our selected chapter, which will be right in the thick of it, so be prepared. Without further ado, this is Operation Imortuus by Pika 53. This story is a sequel to My Little Pony: Twilight's Requiem. Under the orders of Princess Celestia, a new Special Tactics Squad, RRTS, has been sent to investigate a series of bizarre murders. They hope to find answers, but none realize the chaos that awaits. Human in Equestria. Please read and review. And now, on to Chapter 7. Standing within what appeared to be the mansion's main hall, not a sound could be heard except the gasps of the team as they recovered from their nightmarish sprint through the forest. While the dolls freed themselves from their harnesses, Jaden let his gaze drift and marveled at their new surroundings. The sheer size of the room they'd escaped into was the epitome of lavish. It was huge, easily bigger than the apartment he shared with Tess, with gray-flecked marble floor tiles and dominated by a wide carpeted staircase that led to a second-floor balcony. Arched marble pillars lined the ornate hall and provided support to the dark, heavy wood banister of the upper floor, while fluted wall sconces cast funnels of light across walls of cream that were trimmed in oak and offset by the deep burnt ochre of the carpeting. 2 doors were on the wall to the right, while a single door was to the left. A small end table sat to the left side of the grand staircase. In short, the place was magnificent, yet Jaden couldn't quite place why it seemed strangely familiar to him. "Is everyone all right?" he asked. A chorus of affirmations indicated that the others were fine while they continued to survey their new surroundings as they caught their breath. "What the buck was that?" Edie exclaimed. "I wish I knew," Jaden replied, shaking his head. "It looks like the wood around this lock has been splintered, so I guess it's safe to say some pony broke this door open before we got here," Xander cut in. "How are we set for ammo?" Captain Vickers called out. Ejecting his handgun's current clip, Jaden discovered that he only had 2 rounds remaining. During their dash through the woods, he recalled firing a full clip and most of the current one, 28 shots in total. That left him with 8 additional clips of ammo for his sidearm and launcher, along with 10 45-round magazines for his rifle. According to his mental math, that left him with 450 rounds of his pulse rifle and 120 rounds for his pistol, or roughly 48 rounds for his launcher. Tess and Cameron reported their firing 20 shots each, which left the mares with 450 rounds for their rifles and 128 rounds for their pistols, while Xander reported firing 33 rounds, leaving him with 450 rounds for his rifle and 117 rounds for his handgun, not to mention the specialty ammo for their additional weapons. It was perhaps fortunate that they were all equipped with energy weapons, as it allowed them to carry more ammo than conventional ballistic weapons would, not to mention that both his sidearm and launcher shared the same type of magazine. "What is this?" Xander asked. "Not quite your ordinary house, that's for sure," Vickers replied. Jaden realized that they were missing several ponies as Cameron began glancing frantically around the room. "Where's Shadow and Sis?" she asked as she began heading back toward the door they had entered through. "Kid, no! You don't want to go back out there," Vickers snapped. Cameron began to protest, but cut short as Selena spoke up. "I'm tracking them, so they're still alive. It appears they've taken refuge in an adjacent structure." Cameron let out a relieved sigh at the news. "Can we raise them on comm?" Tess asked. "Not likely. I'm detecting an anomaly of some kind that seems to be radiating from the structure. It would appear that limited short-range communications is all that is available at present," Selena replied. Jaden sighed and rolled his eyes. If he's understanding Selena correctly, then they couldn't call the other team, or anyone else for help. and all calm traffic between one another within the mansion itself would be spotty at best. The good news was that Shadow, Fiora, and the 3 dolls accompanying them were still alive. How long they remained that way, however, was another matter entirely. As he continued to study his surroundings, Jaden couldn't shake the feeling of unease that steadily grew within him. Despite the mansion's grandeur, something about the atmosphere of the place just felt wrong. He could see similar feelings of unease displayed upon most of his companions' faces. It's also unfortunate that none of the EMRF personnel survived our encounter in the forest, Selena continued. So what now? Brutalite spoke up. Well, help should be on the way, assuming our friend bothers to call it in, Vickers replied sarcastically. A chorus of contemptuous snorts and groans indicated how his companions felt on the matter. Jaden certainly didn't blame them for feeling such things, considering their pilot had decided to abandon them in this forsaken forest. The dude had seriously screwed up, and they were paying the price for it. The captain, meanwhile, had walked over to one of the doors on the wall to the right of the stairs and rattled the handle, but it didn't open. It's not safe to go back out, and until cavalry arrives, we might as well look around, he remarked. After all, it's obvious that some pony's been keeping this place up, though why and for how long? Jaden nodded thoughtfully at the idea as the captain walked back toward them. All feelings of unease aside, it would be in their best interest to check the place out, and it might even lead to clues in solving their investigation. He was snapped out of his reverie moments later by the sound of a gunshot from somewhere nearby. Although the acoustics within the mansion were off due to its size, it sounded like the noise had originated from beyond the door to their left. In unison, the group turned in that direction. What the hey was that? Xander asked. No one answered him. Check it out and report back ASAP. We'll stay here and wait in case backup arrives, Vickers ordered the Pegasus. If you run into trouble, fire your weapon and we'll find you, he continued. Xander shot him a questioning look, and Jaden nodded his approval. With a sigh, Xander pulled out his shotgun as he walked toward the door. That's why I like to keep this handy, for close encounters, he said. I heard that, Rainbine piped up. Xan, take care, Tess called out as he reached the door. Xander shot her a lopsided grin and nodded once before passing into the next room. The next 6 minutes passed quietly without incident before the sound Jaden dreaded to hear most could be heard from somewhere beyond the adjacent room, the sound of a shotgun being fired. Seconds passed before another shot was heard. Out of the corner of his eye, Jaden could see the anxious gazes of his companions directed at him. Let's move, he said, already heading for the door. Upon reaching the door, Jaden turned and cast Captain Vickers a glance. Go. I'll secure this area. Stay alert, the captain called out. Jaden nodded back to him, then signaled Cameron to open the door. Seconds later, the group filed through into the next room. As they entered, Jaden heard the loud ticking of an old clock. The room was an ornate dining hall, as big as Princess Celestia's bank in Canterlot, and was cut in half by a second-floor balcony stretching all the way around. High above, a chandelier cast funnels of light across the walls of beige that were trimmed in red wood and expensive artwork. The room was dominated by an extravagant wooden table that looked like it easily could support 24 individuals, but set for half that number. Judging by the thin layer of dust coating everything, much like it had within the main hall, it appeared that nothing had been served for weeks. On the other side of the room was an impressive fireplace, another door to its right. Lowering their weapons, the group slowly began to cross the room. As they traveled, a chorus of murmurs told Jaden that the others were as awed by the sight as he was. Glancing up at the second-floor balcony, Jaden didn't see anything but couldn't shake the sudden, unmistakable feeling that they were being watched. As he passed the table, another sight near the fireplace caught his attention. A small pool of blood. You'd better take a look at this, he called out, gaining the others' attention. Quickly rushing over, Cameron and Tess let out startled gasps as they saw what he'd found. This is still fresh, Jaden replied somberly as he probed the pool with a finger. Let's just hope it isn't Zan's. He then looked at Cameron and nodded toward the nearby door before speaking. Go on ahead, and see what you can find. We'll be examining this. Cameron gulped and nodded before drawing her sidearm and heading through the door. Rainbine following her like a demented little shadow. Once they were out of sight, Jaden stood and turned to Tess, noting just how unnerved she was by their situation. Curiously, many of the dolls seemed just as troubled about the circumstance as she was. "There's something about this place," he said. "I have to admit, it's very beautiful, but also really creepy," Tess agreed, shivering. "It's not just that. I swear I've seen this place before," Jaden replied. "Oh, do tell," Brutalite cut in sarcastically. "Do you remember that one whacked-out survival horror game I've got?" Jaden asked. Tess nodded that she did as the dolls looked on in confusion. "I kid you not, this place was a level in it," he continued. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Jaden snorted and struggled to hold back laughter as Tess fixed him with a gaze he'd witnessed many times. A look of such scorn that most creatures would be forced to turn away from shame. It only added to the humor that Brutalite had somehow managed to copy the look. Remembering what that one unicorn had given him, Jaden pulled out the file folder and handed it to Tess. "Despite what you think, this is what that Zeta chick gave me earlier," he said. "Although me and Brutalite couldn't make sense of it before, perhaps you might find something we missed." While still continuing to stare dubiously at him, Tess accepted the folder and began browsing through it. "And just how did she come across this?" she asked suspiciously. "Apparently a mayor showed up at the camp last night and handed it over with instructions to give it to me personally," Jaden answered. He fought back another snicker as Tess continued to glare at him. "Oh, for Celestia's sake, get a room already," Rarefruit snapped. "We're not a couple," Tess roared in reply. Jaden really did have to fight back a laugh at this time, while Edie openly snickered. Said pony was also the only doll in the room that wasn't glaring at them. Seconds later, Edie suddenly began to experience a strange sporadic shudder that looked vaguely familiar and grabbed the group's attention, causing them to stare at her. "What's your problem?" Fluttershy inquired. "I don't know, but whatever that shudder's about, it's a doozy," Edie replied. The rest of the group exchanged looks as Edie continued speaking. "It's almost like there's two of me, but that can't be right." Not a sound could be heard as the rest of the group continued to stare at one another in disbelief. Any response that could have been made was interrupted as the nearby door burst open. Instinctively, Jaden drew and aimed his sidearm at the entryway as they watched Cameron and Rainbine stumble backwards into the room while being pursued by what had at one time been an Earth Pony cult. The condition of the creature indicated that it had expired quite some time ago. Guys?" the larger Pegasus called out frantically. "Got it," Jaden replied, aiming at the shambling beast that slowly approached them. Once the pair had gotten out of the way, Jaden unloaded his remaining ammo into the beast's skull, causing it to silently collapse to the floor in a heap. He then ejected the empty mag and slapped in a fresh one as he turned back to Tess. "Look familiar?" he asked. "Oh, I wish I hadn't just seen that," the alicorn retorted irritably. Jaden silently nodded as he recalled the pair's experiences back in the enrichment center shortly after they'd first met. One of the demented challenges the crazy computerized caretaker had created for them had been to navigate their way through first a reproduction of Ponyville, then a war-torn reproduction of Canterlot, while battling similar creatures. The experience hadn't been pleasant. Gazing at the corpse before them, Jaden began to grasp what was going on. "We found one of the Zetas killed by this thing," Cameron muttered. "Let me guess. The victim had its throat torn out," Jaden replied. "How did you—" the Pegasus stuttered in confusion. "Just call it a hunch." "Wow, that's too good for a hunch," Rainbine piped up. Jaden snorted as he heard Tess let out a frustrated groan. "Selena, can you pull up a schematic for the structure?" he asked. "Accessing. Stand by." Seconds later, a top-down holographic blueprint of the mansion's first and second floors materialized in the air before them. Studying the map, Jaden shook his head incredulously as he recognized the floor plan. Of all the designs that could have been used, the mansion had been built as a carbon copy of the remade version of the very game he'd just been alluding to. It didn't seem possible for such a thing to happen, yet somehow they were now trapped in an environment straight from grand fantasy. Then again, it wasn't every day that one found themselves transported to a world from a cartoon about talking ponies after playing a video game either. Behind him, Jaden heard Cameron whistle softly while Tess let out another frustrated groan as they also recognized the layout. Fortunately, they could see the locations of every member of the team displayed on the map, illustrating that Xander was still alive and moving somewhere beyond the door ahead. Two additional blips on the dining room's upper floor caused Jaden to cock an eyebrow in curiosity as he wondered where they'd come from. He hadn't seen anything up there when he looked earlier. It would appear that 60% of the doors have been unlocked prior to our arrival. Those that remain locked are either unusually constructed or require a special key. Selena spoke up. "So, what is all this supposed to mean?" Fluttershy asked. "We've got problems," Jaden answered. "Oh, this is going to be a long night," Cameron contributed. Out of the corner of his eye, Jaden watched Tess plant her face in a hoof while continuing to groan. Although he didn't fault her for being annoyed at the situation, it was still funny to watch. "I've got a massive migraine forming and can't deal with any more craziness right now, so let's just go back and report to the captain what we found," she grumbled. "You want to talk to the captain? Let's go talk to the captain," Jaden retorted, smirking at the murderous gaze Tess shot him. The group then made their way out of the room the way they'd originally come. Standing upon the dining room's upper floor, two mares watched the commando team as they exited the dining room into the main hall. The first mare, a golden-coated alicorn with a crimson and azure-streaked mane, smirked to herself as she reflected upon what they'd just learned. Her companion, meanwhile, a blue-coated unicorn mare with a platinum-colored mane with a pink streak running around its length, grumbled softly to herself. Both mares were dressed in outfits similar to what the commando team wore, outfits liberated from the wrecked chariot outside. Of course, the events that had transpired thus far had done so according to the first mare's desire. Said mare chuckled to herself as she recalled how her companion had recently taken an unexpected flight this evening, which had contributed to the current situation. The unicorn really should get herself checked out. The commando team, meanwhile, seemed to be living up to the alicorn's expectations. Even if the mare didn't quite understand most of the references they'd made, she was pleased to note that the group certainly seemed to grasp the situation, particularly since one of them was a traitor to the cause and knew about everything that was happening. Although she hadn't expected to see the quartet of animated dolls, said dolls wouldn't affect her overall plan, so the mare was inclined to let the matter go. What intrigued them most, however, was how the little blue one had somehow managed to detect them, particularly since the invisibility spell they'd used rendered them hidden from view, not to mention the fact that it bore an uncanny resemblance to her companion. The alicorn chuckled to herself yet again. This was going to be fun. "I still say we should just kill 'em," the unicorn grumbled. "Oh, what fun would that be? Particularly when they're going to be doing all the work," the alicorn countered. "All that's left now is to make sure they complete their task, so I want you to go back to the lower floor and follow them while I secure the upper one. Just make sure they don't see you," she continued. "Oh, who cares? It's not like anything that's happening really matters," the unicorn whined. The alicorn felt herself involuntarily twitch as her companion once again demonstrated how foolish she could be at times. It was all the mare could do not to openly verbalize how much of a spoiled imbecile the unicorn was behaving, and how she wanted to rip said pony in two. "And this is why I'm the one who gives the orders," she snapped. "Besides, it's not like we can't just kill them later. Now go!" The unicorn merely rolled her eyes and huffed in reply. "Whatever you say, pain-set shimmercakes," said Unicorn retorted before breaking into snickers. The mocking inflection she noted within the unicorn's voice at the pronunciation of her name prompted the alicorn to let out a vicious snarl. In retaliation, she levitated her protesting companion in the air before throwing the unicorn over the railing to the floor below. The alicorn smirked to herself at the delightful sound of the unicorn's painful reintroduction to the ground, followed moments later by said pony's angry speech. She then began walking toward the door leading into the main hall, eager to see what would happen next and to make sure things proceeded according to plan. I regret not speaking more in the introduction. I thought the story might be a bit like the game Fear, and I would have been pretty darn close to the money on that prediction. Just a franchise over, really. But I definitely wasn't expecting it to be literally in the video game of Resident Evil. And I know we're in the middle of the story, but wow, that's a lot of different characters on this team. I liked Jaden and Tess's banter back and forth. I enjoyed their dynamic. But I did feel it was a bit odd for the light mood despite the possibility that Xander had died. With past stories, I feel I'm able to piece together a lot of what's going on. Not on this one. Definitely interested though. It seems like the story has quite a bit of depth to it, and I'm only scratching the surface with this chapter. My question for you, my dear viewers, is what do you think the goal is for the two villains at the end? Is it some grand conspiracy to bring zombies to the real world, or is it an elaborate scheme to get a walkthrough for Resident Evil? What do you think? This was Operation Imortuus. Thank you Pika53 for making such a wonderful story. The link will be in the description below. And thank you listeners for joining me on this exciting adventure. This is Open Air signing off. But don't worry, I'll be back soon with another FIM Fiction Roulette. How are we? Oh my god, there's so many people. I'm gonna fucking shit. How are we set for ammo? Captain Vickers called out. How are we set for...